Right. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the EOcafe, where the EO community meet. It's been a few weeks since I've been in the EOcafe, as I missed the last one, and we skipped one at the beginning of May, so I've got to remember how to do all this again. Um, really interesting subject today. The normal rules of the EOcafe, so please keep your microphones switched off unless I ask you to join the conversation. I'll do that if you put a question into the chat that we then want to pick up. So I'll ask you to pose your own question, and feel free to leave your cameras on. It's always good to see people, and the whole goal of this right at the very beginning was to help people sort of stay in touch. So, but of course, if you want to, it's up to you whether you keep the camera on or off. So, the today we're talking about revealing the hidden value of Earth observation. The period from 2024 to 2030 is a vital window of opportunity to advance EO for sustainable economic growth. Major international commitments linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Global Biodiversity Framework, Paris Agreement, Rio Conventions, Dubai Consensus, and others culminate in 2030 targets. Over the same period, environmental disclosure requirements and emissions regulations will take effect. Thousands of new EO satellites are forecast to be launched, and enabling technologies such as artificial intelligence may grow to catalyze adoption. The prospect of adding a cumulative $3.8 trillion to the global economy from 2023 to 2030 and reducing emissions by 2 gigatons per year is a compelling case for increasing the uptake of Earth observation. To achieve these outcomes, collaborative action is needed from every player across the EO value chain to address key barriers such as limited awareness of EO applications, a shortage of specialized talent, fragmented standards, and difficulty navigating the complex EO marketplace. So that's an extract from the report published last week by the World Economic Forum entitled Amplifying the Global Value of Earth Observation. In this, they tackle the difficult question of how much value is created globally through the use of Earth observation, and particularly EO from satellites. And so I'm really pleased today to welcome one of the team that put that report together, Valentino Golovchenko, who is the lead on climate technology in the World Economic Forum, part of the team, as I said. And we shall discuss how the World Economic Forum have assessed the economic and environmental co-benefits of EO in a future scenario where EO is exploited to its full potential. And it should be a very interesting discussion. So, Valentin, welcome to the EOcafe. I've been particularly looking forward to this one. Perhaps just to start off with, as usual, you could say a few words about yourself, just to introduce yourself, your background, and how you ended up working at the World Economic Forum. Valentin.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today for what looks to be a really interesting conversation. Happy to share a few words and then to get right into the content, because I think that's what people are really interested in. So a few words about myself. I've been working around the aerospace industry for about 10 years now. I used to work as a consultant and then as an industrial engineer back home in France. And I joined the forum about 2.5 years ago. And I started working on a broad range of initiatives at the intersection of sustainability and technology. And one of these initiatives has led to the report you just mentioned. I work on Earth observation, and I'll be happy to say a bit more about it, of course, later today.
Right, okay. So as people will know, this is a particularly interesting subject for me. Many will know that a few years ago, we started working in what has become known as SEBS, the Sentinel Benefits Studies. You cite a number of the cases that we've worked on in the report. ERSC is the lead for this work on behalf of ESA and the European Commission. And we created SEBS as an alternative to and to complement the major cost-benefit analyses which were performed by PwC and others to support the rationale and funding for GMES stroke Copernicus. The large cost-benefit analysis take a top-down approach, and we wanted to take a bottom-up approach where we take a single product and try to understand how it's being used and how it creates value along or down, as you prefer, a value chain. So a key actor in this is the primary users of what the data is. So we track and analyze the benefits of using this data. And at first we started calculating economic benefits, but then we expanded because we found a lot of the benefits were actually non-monetary. So the value in encouraging public institutions to work more closely together, to get a wider synoptic view, to develop research that could not be done without the wide synoptic view. And so it's interesting that you've gone down that same path. You've taken two of the dimensions, the economic value and the environmental. And maybe at some point it would be interesting to take that further, but certainly we can continue our discussion. So you've modeled those two dimensions over 37 different applications, which is great. The findings, I have to say, are dramatic, and we look forward to talking about them further. So in the report, before jumping to the report, we often in the EOcafe talk about the institutional framework in which we're operating. We have a lot of new players coming into the sector, and it can be very confusing who's doing what and who fits with everyone else. So maybe as a new player in the sector, or from our perspective at least, a new player in the sector, you could talk about the World Economic Forum, what its mission is, and how you come to look at the value of Earth observation. What's the rationale behind that?
I'll be happy to. So to start with the forum as an institution, so we are a not-for-profit international organization. We're headquartered in Geneva, and we have offices around the world, mainly in India, China, Japan, South North America, in San Francisco and New York, and then of course our headquarters in here. And we have a set of, I think it's now close to 20, what we call affiliate centers, which are independent entities run by local governments around the world, and which with whom we are actually collaborating on several initiatives. So our mission is really to, or at least that's how we define ourselves. We want to address the world's most pressing problems, and that can be economical, social, environmental issues. And we want to do that through multi-stakeholder collaboration. I think that's what really defines the forum and what really differentiates it from other organizations which are trying to address the same issues, including the UN and others, is that we engage the private sector a lot more than these organizations, but we also engage other parts of society. So from local and national governments to other international organizations, large corporations, but also smaller startup innovators, civil society, academia, and others. That's the model that we're trying to promote, that in order to address these existential issues we're facing today, we need to involve as many stakeholders as possible to be part of the solution definition. So that's for the forum. Now, where do I sit within the forum, which I think is an equally interesting question. So the best way I can define it is we organize around what we call centers. And in these centers, each of them addresses the future of something. We have a center for the future of financial services, another one for the future of energy, future of agriculture, and so on. I sit within the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is a term that was coined a few years ago by our chairman, Klaus Schwab and founder. And we really look at all things technology related. So there are other parts of the forum that look at technology, but everything we do has primarily a technology angle, which is our differentiator compared to other parts of the house. In terms of EO, how did we come to work on EO? Well, we have a long-lasting space community at the forum. Yeah. We've been working with this private sector and the public sector on space for at least 10 years that I'm aware of. Wasn't around at the time, but that's what my colleagues have been telling me. And so, as you probably know, we are well known for our annual meeting in Davos that occurs every January. And at the annual meeting in 2023, so last year, our space community gathered, and as usual for this meeting, they usually private sessions in which they define their priorities for the year going forward, what we should be working on collectively. And one of these priorities was Earth observation. So Earth observation, of course, is not new. It didn't start in 2023, but that's really the first time that we got a sense from the community that that was a priority because the technology was mature enough, the market was growing, everything was in place, and yet there are several sectors in which there were major applications of EO that was just not happening. And so we were tasked to start working on this. And the first thing we did, as we usually do at the forum, is we gathered another community which is linked but distinct from the space, the bigger, say, broader space community. We now have around 40 plus members. And from the beginning, we wanted to involve, of course, data providers and companies engaging in data treatment and refinement and all that, but also from the beginning, data users. So potential users from across industries who have great use cases, but are not yet using the technology at scale like they should. And we also engaged various experts and academia. The first thing we did when the community came together for the first time last September at our Sustainable Development Impact meetings in New York is we asked them, what's the biggest problem that needs solving in order to scale EO? Which is a very big question, right? And the thing they all told us is it's awareness. It's not a technological problem anymore. The technology is evolving. I'm sure there can still be refinement in that space. But the applications are best case underestimated by end user industries. And the worst situation, these industries don't even know that there are EO applications in their industry. And that's how we started working on that report. And as you mentioned, the primary objective of the report is really to highlight the scale of the opportunity. And we can speak a bit more to what these numbers mean. I know these are numbers that are surprising, especially to people who know the EO market and the EO industry. And I'll be happy to get into more details.
Okay, yeah, I talk about no one got fired for choosing Microsoft, and to take that more into our sector, people are familiar with GPS and Galileo simply from their cars and their phones. So if somebody in a company or a public organization proposes to use those for solving a certain problem, there's an awareness that people can build on. But when it comes to Earth observation, it's a satellite that's looking down or whatever, but it doesn't go very far. And there isn't this sort of wider awareness that would drive the uptake of applications. And it's a very interesting subject. The 40 members of the group you mentioned, are those all industry or are those sort of government representatives as well, or what's the composition?
There's a good mix of three main categories. One, 50% around in industries, and that's approximately equally split between EO data providers and users. So 25-25. And the remaining 50% is made of mostly academia and international organizations in the space of EO, but also in other spaces, like the World Bank is engaged, among others. And we don't engage national governments at this stage, but that's something that we're thinking about in the months to come.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, and of course the space agencies, JAXA, ESA, and NASA are engaged.
Right, yeah. I mean, they're for me, they're the key stakeholders in the Geo Value organization, where we're trying to work on methodologies and practical methods of assessing impact. And it's the agencies that, for me, really need that data, and the industry, of course, is behind the agencies wanting to have that information, because if they're looking to invest in programs, then they need to justify those. Okay, let's turn to the report, because that's the key subject today. Now, the potential value, and you talk about potential, added from EO data is estimated to be 700 billion per year by 2030, growing from 266 billion last year. I think it was 2023. And you quote this cumulative figure of 3.8 trillion to the global economy. How do you arrive at these figures?
So you mentioned in your introduction bottoms up versus top down analysis, right? And from the beginning, that's exactly the same line of thinking we had, is how do we arrive to a number that at the same time is significant enough that it will catch people's attention, but at the same time also allows us to be granular enough so that these findings can speak to individual industries, individual companies, and we can really take it down to their level. So that's how we decided to have the exact same approach you outlined, which is if I want to walk you through the methodology overall, and hopefully it won't be too many words, we started by defining what we call industry agnostic categories of use. So these are the main ways that organizations across industries can use EO4. So you have in there, for example, site selection, environmental monitoring, and others. And then we started to map these against the industries that we were usually working with at the forum to identify individual use cases, which is the intersection of a use category and an industry. So how do you specifically use EO in that industry on that, within that category? And then for each of these use cases, whenever available, we conducted a large literature review because there's been a lot of studies actually on this topic, marginal improvement that you can get by applying EO to a particular use case. If I want to give you an example, if you look at precision agriculture, if you use EO to monitor crop health, for example, in a cornfield, what's the marginal improvement you get in terms of yield and productivity? And then we took these figures and we scaled them using some adoption curves, both regionally and at the industry level, and looking at the global industry sizes as well. So that's what we did. We really started from the use case and then scaled it up all the way to the global level.
So if I recall correctly, you've got 6 different categories of use, and you talk about 6 industry sectors, but those are just the main ones.
Yes.
You have, I don't know, 12 or 15 different industry sectors that you're working with, but 6 of them you identify as being sort of the main drivers.
Absolutely, absolutely. So these are, as part of the report, as part of analysis, we have identified the 6, which will be long list, but I think it's interesting for people on the call. So that's agriculture, government and public services, electricity and utilities, mining, oil and gas. I always forget a few, supply chain and agriculture, and insurance and financial services was the last one. So what we found is these 6 industries, and why we highlight them in the report is because they capture 94% of the value that we have highlighted in the report. There are approximately twice that number of other industries that were explored and investigated and actually quantified as part of the model. But we chose not to focus on this because unfortunately the value there was much smaller individually than compared to the others.
It makes sense to concentrate on the major players. Just as an aside, I think you find that agriculture accounts for 50% or slightly higher than 50%. Would like to discuss that figure further, but we talked about the economic value. You also have this sort of co-benefit in the environmental value, where you're mainly focusing on carbon. How do you go about assessing that? Because when we're doing the SEBs, we have the economic value, but we then have the other 5 dimensions where I say if you invest enough, it's always possible to come up with some numbers to monetize and calculate in monetary terms, but it's very difficult and maybe inaccurate. So environmental certainly comes into that category, despite quite a lot of work going on in the area. So how do you address the environment dimension?
So from the very beginning, when we started thinking about the report, our goal was really to highlight both business and climate and nature value. And we wanted to do that as much as we can, with one mirroring the other. We didn't even know what we would find at the time, like if there was actually a correlation between the use cases that benefit nature and climate and the use cases that benefit businesses. but that's the intent we have. What is really interesting in our study, I think, is that 80% of the business value that we quantified is actually tied to use cases that have positive climate and nature applications as well.
Mm.
So that means that for these industries, if they use EO in these use cases that we have analyzed, they can also support their sustainability journeys with the exact same use cases. To your question on how do you quantify this, it is definitely an issue. Finding the use cases and listing down all the things you could do with EO in various industries to help at the same time mitigate your emissions and then adapt to the changing climate. It's not an easy thing, but it's feasible. You just look at the literature, you just look at what's out there, you consolidate that, and you get your results. When it comes to quantifying these benefits, there's actually not, especially on the nature side of things, it's very difficult to quantify your nature benefits. So what we chose to do is for nature in particular, like nature conservation, for example, we chose not to quantify these benefits. We listed them down, they are in the report, but there's no proxy to measure it because we couldn't find a great proxy. For climate, we are fully aware, because we've been working on planetary boundaries, for example, lately, that GHG emissions are not the only things that matter when you want to fight climate change. But unfortunately, it is a proxy that people understand, that people are accustomed to now, and that's why we chose to focus on this as a proxy for calculations. So when you look at the report, our headline figure for that is if we use EO at scale in the use cases we mentioned, we could eliminate up to 2 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year. And for reference, that's a number I actually find quite interesting. That's equivalent to the yearly emissions of 1/3 of the cars in the world today. Because people understand dollars, but sometimes when we talk about gigatons, not everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. So that's why we like to use that number to put things in perspective. Yeah.
No, everyone looks for the numbers, and particularly for the dollars or euros. So that's quite understandable. But again, we didn't have the resources to look at monetizing a lot of the benefits. The origins of EO are partly scientific, but a lot of its origins to the defense industry. How is defense included in your calculations?
So we have actually excluded defense applications from the study because we don't have a defense industry represented at the forum, that we don't typically engage defense industry. We engage with aerospace players who of course have defense activities, but that's not a strong focus of our work, which is why it wasn't considered for the study.
Okay, so I mean, we consider that defense is somewhere around 40% of the market, and government applications are at least 50%.
And just to that, Jeff, if I can, that's a great point you make, because we do talk about economic value and not market value in the report.
Right, I was getting that, yeah.
And we are aware that today most of the market for your data is actually government driven, maybe for defense purposes or others, but that's the main. They are the main purchaser of this data. But what we've measured is actually the value generated in the industry, but also in downstream of the data. And what we found is actually that downstream value is 150 times bigger than the value that can be generated in the EO industry itself. So that's really, it's a value multiplier. And that's the big message we have with the report. The report is actually not intended, it's great if you read it, but it's not actually intended to people who know a lot about EO. It's intended for people who don't know a lot about EO, but have use cases and are not aware of it.
No, but I think the people who know about EO, and especially we particularly look after the industrial sector. They have a strong interest in having this sort of information to hand as part of their engagement with government and public authorities. It depends on their business direction, of course, their business model. But I mean, this is where I see what you've done is extremely valuable. I'm not alone in this, but I used to draw a picture of an iceberg with the value underneath and the sort of the market on the top, and basically saying, well, how does the industry capture more of that value in its business? And you've got other industries within the the sunken part of the iceberg who are also trying to capture the value and keep it. So you've got a tension there in trying to make it. But I think it's very, very important that people recognise that what we do in SEBS and more particularly your report talks about economic value, which is not the same as market value at all. Nevertheless, it gives a very good indication of where the priorities can lie and where the interest can be. Yeah. Do you, on that point, do you intend to update the report, or is it a one-off exercise?
So we typically don't update reports at the forum, except like really flagship reports, like you probably heard about our global risk report, which is published every year around the annual meeting, and we have a few others.
Yeah.
So this one we probably won't update it as it is. What we're thinking about right now is how do we take these findings and how do we make them even more granular and even more actionable for these 6 downstream industries. Which is how can we, for example, work on some white papers that really deep dive on each of the sectors and make that, I mean, bring that to a level that it can be discussed in a boardroom or by a CEO with their sustainability officer, chief technology officers, and really get them asking the question like, why are we not doing anything about EO, right? And challenge a bit these preconceived ideas about the technology.
Well, I mean, that's certainly something that the industry is very interested in. So, I mean, an ongoing dialogue there would be something would be of interest. How can that be made to happen? How can companies from the sector be involved with you in that discussion?
So we already have a few partners from the industry who are working with us, and they are cited in the report. The way we typically operate, and I don't want to get into the technicalities, is we are a membership organization. So we have members from the private sector, and there's different types of membership, and we can discuss that offline. But the best way, if people want to get involved with the work, I would say reach out to me, and we can have a separate conversation. But we're definitely looking for more partners to join this 40 members community that we have today. We have big objectives to grow it on the end user side of things as well at the same time. I think it's an interesting forum for companies in the sector to actually get to meet also the end users, get to hear from them. What are the challenges using the data, and what could make it more actionable for them, and how can the sector respond to that demand?
Are there sort of dedicated meetings during the year that would be it would sort of expedite that dialogue and that discussion?
So we run quarterly virtual meetings with the full community. And in addition to that, we have a few in-person touch points throughout the year, which follow the forum institutional calendar. So everyone knows about the annual meeting, but we have other meetings. I'll be going to San Francisco next week for our global technology retreat, which is one of our events really focused on technology that our Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution is leading. We will have the annual meeting of the new champions in China in June. We have the Sustainable Development Impact meetings in New York in September, and all of these happen on a yearly basis. So there is at least 3-4, I would say, in-person touch points throughout the year as well.
And we get for some years now have been sort of engaged working with the Group on Earth Observations, GEO, which are very close to you, and I'm sure you know quite well. Are there formal links between the Economic Forum and GEO, the Group on Earth Observations?
So GEO is a part of our community, and actually it's a fun story, but Yana is going to join us in San Francisco so in 2 weeks. And she's going to speak on a session which is dedicated to EO there. So we have regular touch points with them, and yeah, they're engaged in the work. They contribute to deliverables, and they help coordinate these conversations between the users and the providers.
Okay, I'll talk a bit about more, a little bit more about that in a minute. But if anyone has questions, please put them into the chat and please join us in the discussion. Mireille Lafay has asked about the defence services, which was something I wanted to tackle anyway. Mireille, if we sort of address your question, or do you want to take it a bit further?
Yes, thank you, Geoff. Yes, Muriel Lafay from CNES, French Space Agency. Yes, as you mentioned, Geoff, as defense services are about 60% of the market for the EU. I think it's I understand that the World Economic Forum didn't take them into account because, as you mentioned, you address the economic value and not the market value of all this. But well, anyway, I think it's in a certain manner, it's difficult not to take them into account because Earth observation is so dual that it has an impact anyway. So do you have any proposal to take that into account and to include their impact on the global economic value this time?
Thank you, Marielle. That's a fair point, and it's not the first time we're hearing it, of course. The intent of this report was really to speak to industries who are not used to using EO, and that's also one of the reasons why defense is also not mentioned there. We do have some players in the community who also, of course, have defense applications of their technologies, and they do raise this point as well regularly. I think at this stage, the only thing I can say is we could definitely work on this as, I mean, we have government and public services as one of our industries, which, I mean, you could include national defense in there to some extent. We have chosen on purpose not to include defense use cases there. But if we do publish these white papers that I've mentioned, and there's one on government, maybe there could be a section there. Yes, but I think that would be the most reasonable way for us to work on the topic.
I mean, presumably some of the 40 members of your group, you said are large aerospace companies, so they have strong defense interests.
Of course they do.
As well. So I wouldn't be, have they would have an interest in looking at the defense part of the picture as well.
Absolutely.
I presume. Okay. Natural capital and accounting, ecosystem services, yeah. Bernard, is it Bernard Stewart or Stuart Bernard? I'm sorry.
Sorry, Stuart Bernard.
Stuart Bernard. Stuart, come in, join us.
Yeah, thank you very much. So obviously I come from that background where we're looking at, from a service provider agency type perspective, you know, how do you look at the value of ecosystem monitoring? And you know, obviously the starting point is to figure out what the value of your ecosystem services or your natural capital is. And the route we've taken in the past is more like a value of information. So, you know, perfect information is worth 1% of the resource, etc. So I see, I'm just looking at the report now, and I can see that this has been very understandably kind of elided over because it's an indirect value and it's difficult. But, you know, given things like climate change, it's extremely important, and there is huge value there, even though it is very difficult to capture. So I just thought, you know, any plans to dip a toe in these waters, figuratively speaking? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. And that's an analysis I share, actually. I think I think it's a great report. I think one of the main drawbacks of this report is we don't speak to nature enough. It's mentioned in the first section. It's not quantified, and definitely we speak more to climate than to nature in general. So my answer to you is one of the leads we have for this year, and again, we're still shaping plans for the year. We're not sure yet exactly what will be the main thought leadership we will develop until the next annual meeting. But one of the leads I have is on exactly that, building that level of granularity, that level of detail, and trying to quantify as much as we did for the climate side on the nature side, I think, as well. So yeah, definitely top of mind.
Yeah, thank you. One last comment is often how the value is realized is actually more important than the dollar amount in this particular case. So figuring out how, if you look at a typical EO value chain goes something like data, products, analytics, insight, simulation, something like that. But figuring out how it works across these sectors is, to my mind, sometimes much more important than the dollar amount, which is always, of course, huge. So yeah, thank you.
A quick reaction to that, and that's exactly what we try to do with the report as well. Of course, it's still early stages. We needed the big figures because, unfortunately, you need the big figures to be in the press, to have people talk about your work, and that's something we've learned in the past. But the reason we took that bottom-up approach I mentioned earlier is because we wanted to start with the applications. We wanted to start with, if you're in the banking or insurance industry, how can you concretely use EO to support your current operations? And we wrote that report with EO experts, but also with these end user industries. So we wrote that in a language that hopefully speaks to them. And that's why we're trying to get one step further, because right now, if you look at the report, we have these tables which list down all the potential applications, and you have short paragraphs that describe what could be done. But of course, it doesn't go that deep, because otherwise you would have a 500 pages report. But when we think about these white papers going forward, that would be the trying to reach, which is, if I look at it from the perspective of the C-suite executive in the banking industry, in the agriculture industry, or others, we want them to be able to read and exactly what they need to do in order to start start capturing that value, really, that your data can provide for them.
It's
Thank you very much.
it's always interesting to drill down, and I mean there are so many opportunities to drill down here, whether it's in defence or environment, or indeed in the other areas that we look at, like the regulatory, the impacts of the regulatory environment on the use of the services is very, very strong. In many under many applications, so it is certainly interesting to dig down. I mentioned Geo earlier. I'm part of a group called Geo Value, which is looking at trying to put in place different ideas and methodologies for impact assessment. And at Geo's request, we're now starting to work on a toolkit that would give people the tools by which they could analyze the impact of their own services and what they're doing. And we would like to work across the different Geo activities and to encourage some of them and even support some of them in performing impact assessments. So your work is clearly of interest and relevance to that. So I hope at some point you would be able to come and talk with the Geo Value group, and maybe even join and participate, support the group with your perspectives and the work that you have and hopefully will be doing.
We're always interested in new collaborations with like-minded people, so definitely something to explore.
Great. Well, we'll take that one up offline at some point and with the other members of the group. Another question, Juliet. Juliet, come and put your question.
Hi. Yes, I have a question about the perimeter of Earth observation data. Because it's larger than we are aware. Normally, when we speak about Earth observation data, it's more data from satellite. And in your definition, page 7, I see it's also in situ data. So I understood all data which we can measure something in the Earth.
Absolutely. Our definition is broader than a typical Earth observation from satellites. Satellites are big chunk of the, I mean, satellite data is a big chunk of the data that we take into account. And if you look at the applications across industries, most of them are actually linked to satellite data. But we do have some applications, especially in agriculture. And I'm reacting to what you said earlier, Jeff, that you were not challenging, but questioning the 50% number of value captured in agriculture. A big reason for that is also because a lot of these use cases are actually not driven by satellites. They are driven by planes, by drones, by even local sensors. You can use thermometers. You can use all devices and sensors that allow us to capture variables linked to the Earth and the Earth systems are in scope for the study.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It's much clear for me.
Yeah, that for me would perhaps shift the dial a little bit in terms of the value of agriculture, I must admit, because I see a lot of in situ and local sensors now sort of becoming much more relevant. And yeah, certainly if they're all included, then I can understand that agriculture would form a much larger part of the market. I think there are even some of the applications in the report which would be difficult to do from satellites. So it's very clear there is a broader perspective. That makes the analysis much harder. I mean, that is a challenge to doing the analysis if you're including all different sensors.
I would say it was a challenge at first when we were actually selecting these use cases, because you have, of course, many more use cases to choose from. But since we wanted to have a robust analysis, we actually didn't quantify all of the use cases we found, because for some of them, we just didn't have the evidence available in the literature in order to make a strong case for the value that EO can add. So yeah, a bit more work at the beginning, but also I think it allowed us to capture more applications than we would have if we only focused on satellite data.
Yeah, okay. I don't know whether it would be interesting at some point to try to sort of separate out the satellite-based benefits. I mean, clearly from our sector it would be, but I can,
well,
it becomes,
I mean, we have that figure. It's just not in the report.
To make that separation.
We know which use cases are linked primarily to satellites and which ones are not. To be fair, it wouldn't be that easy. Take that back, because some of these use cases actually use a combination of both. And it's not simply it uses satellite data or not. So probably a bit more work. So we don't have the figure. You've
basically, I think, come up with one indicator, haven't you? Where you've got this intersection of industry and task. You then work out what the indicator would be of generation of value there, and apply that to the value of the sector. So you're applying the percentage.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we within SEBS, sometimes it's very hard to get justifiable numbers, and we end up making assumptions. We try to be very conservative in those assumptions, because we don't want to be challenged by people saying, you know, this is pipe dream, you know, la la land. But generally, you know, we test all those assumptions with the players that we're working with, and generally they've been accepted as conservative. Did you have a process within the report of validating? I think when we talked, you explained that you had a team that was looking at that.
Yes. So there was a dedicated team who worked specifically on the valuation list, the dollar value. And they are the ones who found all the literature to support the numbers that we had in the report. And they run these figures through a panel. I think we had almost 100 consultations, if I remember, with people across the EO industries, both EO providers, but also people in academia. And the other thing that we ran through this panel was our figures about our adoption curves. So how is the adoption today in a given sector? Where will it be in 2030? How fast will it scale? This also, because this is more qualitative data. And that's why we also wanted to have some robust backing behind that. So that was when we're developing the report itself. And then I mentioned we're working with a community at the forum. The community actually fed a lot of information into the report, qualitative information mostly. And then there was an entire review cycle with them in which they got to review the entire report, share feedback, and we had a few iterations with them.
Okay. The next question we've got is from Ushua Prashant. Ushua? No? It's coming back to the question of future reports, and are there any particular trends that you can identify that you would like to explore further?
I think I already mentioned too, we can either go down the route of deep dives on each industries, or we could explore more nature applications than we've done so far. Few other things come to mind. One of the things we've realized is people don't actually love to read long PDFs as much as we love producing them. And hopefully this one is entertaining until the end. So we're looking at opportunities to take this information, take this data, take this analysis, and build them into something a lot more interactive. And we're working with our community members on that. Can we help people visualize these use cases beyond just reading them, reading about them? And can we help them visualize the scale of the opportunity? And so I can't say too much. We're working on some prototypes there, and hopefully we'll be able to share more soon.
That will be interesting. I mean, certainly one of the things that we do, and the GeoValue community recognizes is about storytelling. Telling the story of what's happening and making that accessible to people is as important as the analysis.
And even, and especially, I would say at the executive level as well, when you have people who, have to process a lot of information every day, and to get to their priority list, it can be difficult if you just present your information the same way everyone else does. So that's also what you're trying to investigate, like how can we make sure that if we get 5 minutes of attention span from, let's say, an executive from Unilever or other, how can we make sure that EO sticks with them, and that at the next meeting with the CEO, they bring it up and they start actioning that.
Yeah. Because you can either, again, it can either be top down or bottom up in terms of introduction. If it can be top down, then that's the strongest way.
It's the easy way in, yes, but it's
not often easy.
No.
And the other way, I mean, one of the things that we find with our reports, we have somebody, we're talking with them, and suddenly they move jobs, and we're sort of back to square one, and having to find somebody else or to rebuild the relationship with others. Rainer had a question. Come.
Yes, sorry for the background noise. I'm currently in Washington in the World Bank, and I'm confronted with a lot non-AO experts. And, the question from my side is, I think the main obstacle is that these Earth observation awareness is not really available in a lot of these departments or user groups. How can you promote the use that they really accept this methodology as a standard, for a lot of things? The most discussion that we have, they say, yes, but it's not really considered in my daily process. Usually they work with Excel sheets or something like that, but they don't really see the potential of these Earth observations. So I think we have to invest a lot into building awareness, also in these international institutions. How can you support, or do you that?
Well,
so, thank you.
That's what we try to do with the report as a first step, is before getting into the detailed processes and how these can integrate EO, already what's the size of the opportunity at the industry level, which is a figure that not a lot of stakeholders actually had in mind, and that's why I think we had to put it on paper to get the conversation started. Now, as we think about next steps, this is exactly what you mentioned. It's about first making it tangible. It's We got their attention by telling them they can capture X billion in a given industry with EO. Now it's about telling them how to do that. And that's the priority we have for the year to come. I mentioned a few leads we have. We're not exactly sure yet how it will materialize, but that's definitely an objective. It's maybe not going down to the process level, because that would be a lot if we need to do this for all industries, but at least the macro process. I mean, in every industry, there are macro processes that will come on across organizations. And if we could get to that level of granularity and share for this macro process, this is how it can be used. This is how other organizations are doing it, because that's also the strength we have at the forum is we're not for profit. So we can share success stories from other organizations and we won't be accused of promoting them. And we don't in general. So we're actually, that's one way we interact with our stakeholders, is by sharing success stories from others, and that can inspire them to actually do the same. And that's a lead we have also for next year, or this year, and May and onwards.
Thank you so much.
No, it seems to me that one of the big strengths is your interaction with all industries, and at a high level as well. And that's something that's a big advantage. And maybe some of the stories, some of the work that we've been doing can be helpful in that respect. In that context, let me ask Alessandra to come in, and she has talking about reporting and testimonials. Alessandra?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Jeff. I'm from the European Space Agency, and I'm responsible for this SEBS study. So I think this was already debated. I wanted to report the experience from SEBS that this building on testimonials who really had a positive experience and can explain how they use the data and what was the impact of using them and what were the benefits seems to be really beneficial. And in the study, it was really building these networks, putting peers together that could explain their experience was really effective. And so I think this is one of the ways to go. And I would, I think maybe the World Economic Forum can provide really an ideal forum to build these networks of peers. And at ESA, we are certainly happy for any recommendation you can have or how we can cooperate on, we can support on this side. Because there is, in the last years, there's been much effort on promoting and improving the uptake of your data, but there is maybe only as much that we can do from the space community. We need to go outside from the space community, and we certainly need to have this cooperation with larger organizations.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the goal we have as well. And I think that's where we are well positioned in general at the forum is our strong links to the private sector. And in that case, beyond the private sector, right? And strong links with all other industries, and especially facilitating these peer level conversations that you mentioned. And we are in touch with ESA as part of the work, and definitely appreciate the contributions there. And hoping to feed back also some useful findings.
That gives me a nice opening to just talk about the workshop that we're organising in a few weeks' time. We have a workshop where we're looking to discuss and validate findings from a transversal analysis that we've been doing, and no, hold the slide for the moment, Tanya. Sorry, let me just explain in the call. So we have 3 sessions over 2 days on Thursday, the 6th of June, which will be a fully virtual workshop with targeted at European users, and then 2 sessions on Thursday, the 13th of June, which is part of the ERSC Expandio conference, where we look firstly at more local and regional users, and then at international users, and there we're leveraging the GeoValue network. So this is going to be looking at at certain cases, the results from certain cases, the questions about how to encourage uptake, what are the barriers to uptake in different circumstances. So it's a free workshop. Everyone's free to join. The link to register is in the chat, and at the end we'll have the slide just showing what's happening. So anyone on the call who's interested in looking at this further, then please come and join us in the workshop. And Alessandra says one of the key findings for us is this network of peers where people from a sector can exchange on their own best practices on what they're doing and understanding better. And we think this would be an excellent way to increase the uptake in different organizations, different sectors. So that's my publicity part out the way. There was another question which was in the chat. Ludwig Auger, is that right?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Well, just a wider question. In those observation, most of the things starts with data, but of course you cannot process your data on your laptop. They are too big, etc. So it takes infrastructure, it takes AI, it takes skills, developers, data scientists, etc. In your analysis, are those side aspects taken into account, or do you have any clue on how to assess it?
Thanks. Our analysis mainly focused on downstream applications, and you assumed that you would have the data already refined and insights extracted from the data. But we do speak in the last section to what can be done to scale adoption. One of our main findings, I think, would not be exactly novelty to this group, but it's moving as much as possible as data providers from pixels to solutions, is what we say. In that a lot of end users don't want to have the infrastructure, the data centers, the skills internalized. A lot of them would much rather have software solutions as a service, cloud-based, that they can use without having to do all the processing themselves. So I think that's one of the main recommendations we have in the report. There are others in terms of building workforce that is I would say capable with EO data, but mostly capable with EO insights rather than actual data analysis and treatment. Just going through my notes, but yeah, I think these are the most relevant to the question.
Okay, thanks a lot.
It's a bit like the satellite data or other in situ data or whatever as well. I mean, you're not pinpointing the sources. You're assuming that they are there and that they can feed into the processing, into the value chain. Okay. If there's no further questions, I know Valentin has to shoot off fairly quickly at the end.
Apologies.
So I'm going to draw it to a close at this point, perhaps a little bit more promptly than usual. It doesn't mean to say that we close the connection. You can still join us for an informal discussion if you wish, but I'll close this part of the meeting with Valentin. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope we'll have plenty of further opportunity to exchange in the future regarding this activity. We're still developing more in the SEBs, and we hope that you can develop more in your work in the ways that you've been describing. So that's really good. Thank you. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for the invitation. It was a really great conversation. Thanks for all the questions, and yes, hoping to reconnect later in time and continue these interesting conversations.
We'll be back to you fairly quickly, I think. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
So bye for that. For the EOcafe, if we now have the slide. So the next EOcafe. So there's the slide for the workshop. It's in 3 parts over 2 days. the registration is there. If you go to the registration site, you'll get more information on the program and what's happening. So hopefully some of you will be able to join us for at least one or two of those sessions. And then the next EOcafe in 2 weeks' time, as usual. So every other Thursday, 4 o'clock. And we're talking about shipping in this case, looking at the use of EO for shipping. Focus on the Baltic and Arctic, but looking at the requirements linked to an ESA best practice project. So I think that should be very interesting in terms of the data needs, the requirements, the information requirements, what data can be supplied, and the gaps in that environment. So come and join us again in 2 weeks, and at that point we'll turn off the recording. And if anyone wants to join in and say anything, just feel free to open your microphone and say something.